No kidding. I'm gonna get that out of my screen
Okay, well, we'll get going here.
here.
Hi, I'm Todd Nash, President of the Oregon Cattlemen's Association. Here today with Will Wise, Executive Director for the Oregon Beef Council. And Will, you want to tell us a little more about yourself there?
Happy to, Todd. Thanks for the invite and nice to be with everybody. I've been with the Oregon Beef Council for quite a while now, maybe going on to 14 years this autumn. And I was not in animal agriculture much before that, although I've been around all kinds of Oregon agriculture. My history goes back to being a produce broker as a horticulture and ag econ student at Oregon State University and in the 70s and 80s. And so there's hardly a fruit or vegetable or produce item that I didn't buy or sell. And I got a scholarship in college from the biggest produce brokers on the West Coast. And those guys made a lot of money. They smoked cigarettes all day and they swore at each other. And I decided that wasn't for me. But it really got me into I couldn't buy and own a farm at that time. I grew up working on some of the biggest cherry farms, driving a cherry shaker as a teenager, high school. But I ended up at the Oregon Potato Commission, and it was just a great fit for me because there's marketing components. There's also like OCA and Todd, they work quite a bit in legislative stuff. There's some things we may talk about where the Oregon Beef Council and some of the commodity commissions can play in that space a little bit, but it's a little more restrained. But I like that very much, working in Washington, D.C. and working with the farmers, having meetings in Klamath Falls, Ontario, Hermiston. And then I thought, I know quite a bit about Oregon agriculture, right? But then I took the Oregon Beef Council job, and it's a whole different set of counties. Not whole different. There's a lot of overlap, but I've really enjoyed that part. In between, I did 4 or 5 years with the U.S. Department of Agriculture as an international trade negotiator, and I lived in Oregon. Senator Ron Wyden kind of helped set that up. He wanted some Oregonians to work on that stuff, and but I reported to Washington D.C. And the take home of that was, how hard can it be? Government job. I was kind of the dullest knife in the drawer of these trade negotiators because they really worked hard. And then I just wanted to get back to Oregon agriculture. So that's how I ended up with the Beef Council, and I've been loving it ever since. The people, the parts of the industry, hopefully there's some things we can help with from, my experience and working with these other commodity commissions, Todd.
Well, thanks for that. Well, let's get into talking a little bit about the beef checkoff and those dollars and how they're collected and what you do with those.
Yep. I'll thumbnail that for you, and then we can talk about whatever areas you want. And there's, I think, about 43 qualified state beef councils, QSBCs or SBCs, state beef councils. Most of them pass muster every year. I think I won't mention the specific states, but since I've been around, I think 2 states dropped out, one came back. What that has to do with is crossing T's and dotting I's, right? And if you do an A+ job of that, the board and the farmers and the ranchers hopefully don't get to see that much of that. I've dealt like with these other ag organizations and always had pretty good luck with that. But Julie Hoffman, our associate director of the Oregon Beef Council, farm family gal from Oregon, has worked with the Beef Council a long time and rarely had any problems in that area, no findings. We have an annual audit regularly done by the state of Oregon, which is required by the National Beef Checkoff Federal Act and Order of all state beef councils. And like I say, there's been a couple states that had some money issues and didn't do everything right, but I'm very proud of our efforts there. That's job one, and hopefully it's just A grade work or A+ work. So Julie's retiring this year, and we'll have a problem filling her shoes, Todd. But and it is a little complicated. Maybe I can talk a little bit about why on the checkoff. For Oregon, it is a little bit convoluted, but it works pretty well. But Julie's managed that, and the new person we have coming in, we cut that position down to not full time anymore to save a little money. But I think we can. Looks like we're on a good path to continue to dot those I's and cross those T's 110%. What happens with the $1.50 checkoff in Oregon is, it used to be $1 before 2006, 2007 in Oregon. Now it's $1.50 because of the addition of an Oregon 50 cents checkoff. So it went from $1 a head to $1.50 a head. when it was just $1, half went to Denver through the Cattlemen's Beef Board, which goes to cooperators, the biggest of which most people have heard of, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, the NCBA, but there are others, some quite big now. And then 50 cents would stay in Oregon. With the additional Oregon legislative, it's part of our statute, our enabling statute through the Oregon legislature, added it, this 50 cents, but it had earmarks on it. And when I came in, that was a little controversial, Todd. But since then, you're dealt the cards you're dealt with. One, it's the law. Two, and three, it can work in your favor. So there's positive producer image, which isn't like our advertising on the federal dollar, but that's one of the parts of the Oregon 50 cents, relatively newer checkoff, that goes to a lot of things in your people that may be looking at this, Todd, in your part of Oregon with Oregon Cattlewomen events. The Oregon Cattlemen's Association is a big part of that, support of the Oregon Cattleman magazine, and smaller things on nutrition, blogging, and healthy lifestyle and positive producer image in maybe smaller budget line items, item by item, couple thousand here, 3,000-4,000 there. But I really like that part of the budget because it gave us some flexibility of, you don't have to be a big advertising company to get some funding from the Oregon Beef Council. And if anybody's out there interested, you're welcome to contact me, or I can put you in touch with the staff. Not everybody gets funded. In fact, most don't, about kind of half and half, maybe a little more than half don't get funded. But many that put in for a couple of years and show the board the value of what they're doing, especially with those micro grants or smaller expenditures. And our board of directors is all farmers and ranchers. We have one public member. We have a couple dairy members. But it's a very good board of directors made up of, cow-calf producers, a couple feedlot guys and handlers, stuff like that. So they take it seriously and looking at those proposals for the budget, and might take a couple years, but some of those smaller ones do get funded going forward, something like that. So.
Yeah, well, thanks for that explanation. Maybe you want to talk more specifically about the 50 cents and how it's described as the 5 dimes and what those are in particular.
Yeah, Todd. So good that you use the term 5 dimes. And in your office and my office, you start yelling these terms out when you need the 5 dimes budget. Or so what that is if you think of the Oregon 50 cents, there are 5 components of it, each amounting to 10 cents on that $1.50 checkoff. And that was, I think, 2000, 2007 legislature, 2008 budget that came into play. And I'll go through those a little bit as you recommended, and then maybe spend a little time on some of the specifics of each. There are 2 research line items. By line item, I mean it's that part of the budget that money must go. That's a unique thing about the Oregon 50 cents, as opposed to the federal dollar and many other state beef councils, Idaho, Washington, Texas. I went to the Texas Beef Council office in Austin. They don't have this. So they can move their money around in those parts of the budget quite freely. The Oregon 50 cents, when you put that money in one of those 5 dimes that Todd mentioned, it has to stay there. So the 2 research line items are animal science research projects. And then the other one for research is the Rangeland Sciences Research Project. And then there's the positive producer image one I talked about just a minute ago. Study legislation, which allows policy work for the Oregon Beef Council, which most state beef councils can't do. Some can. It's kind of a legal authority to do that. So we can track legislative issues that have policy implications, where there's a firewall for a lot of state beef councils that can't do that. That allows us to fund, really most of that funding does go to the Oregon Cattlemen's, because we have a division of labor, I think a good one, Todd, of you're the experts in Salem. Oregon Beef Council guys have joined you in the past. I do work in Washington, D.C., and so do you. And we can't do certain things that OCA can do, such as support ballot measures and a number of other things that kind of are quasi-state funds under the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And so those are some of the dimes. The other one, the 5th one, is administrative. And when we put this into place, I wasn't here yet, but the National Cattlemen's and the Cattlemen's Beef Board in the Denver, Colorado area, as many of you know, sent auditors out. And I think it was a vice chairman at the time, vice president of uh, fiduciary affairs or something like that. He set it up, and Julie was just coming around. But again, to have firewalls between those funds of what legally you can use those for, and the language there is, as we've talked about, a little more permissive. Research, study legislation, positive producer image, uh, and then having the federal dollar part of the budget, the older one, if you will, that's always been around since 1959, used for what its intended purposes are. And there's a legal framework for that too. So it gets a little convoluted. Some people didn't like, making those dimes so specific. And sometimes we have like better rangeland science research proposals. I say better, more demands for funds, or the board sets up working groups to study those pretty hard. And then they get less in animal science, or vice versa. There might be more money going into animal science one year. And is that good or bad? Answer is yes, kind of good, kind of bad. The good part is the researchers get the message that if there's good research and it's continuing, sometimes those projects takes a few years. There's money in there to do it, and we can't commit to more than a year at a time. That is also a law, but you can work with people and work with faculty and give them the idea that these are the things that are important to the ranchers and farmers. So it shifts a little bit between those research times, and you can't really just rob Peter to pay Paul over here. The downside may be it's the only part of a commodity commission budget I've been involved with over the decades where there's money left over. And we're not in the business of banking money. Do we want to spend every dime and be right to the wire? You got to have a cushion. But it can lead to, these boards of farmers and ranchers, if they're, I wouldn't say disgruntled, but if they want better return on the investment, for the research dollar, for example, they may just sit on money for a year. So if you see that in the budget, don't get concerned. I think, and anybody can come to those research meetings. I think you have, Todd, and other OCA leadership has. And I think we are also involved more with the administration of the university than maybe when I first started looking at this. So the money doesn't sit around. We need to always have, this is maybe Will's opinion, but I think all of our board members, most of them would say the same thing, is the request for proposals, the RFP, that goes out every year requesting these research projects to be submitted to the Oregon Beef Council, need to respond to a list of priorities. So keeping those priorities fresh is, you'd think it'd be easy, but the toolbox for Oregon ranchers, for example, Bill Hoyt is on the Oregon Beef Council now, and he keeps talking about the toolbox and let's make it a better toolbox. And we've lost this tool and that. Another thing I'll point out very quickly, Todd, and then I'll stop on the research part of the dimes, but there was a proposal on the economics of wolf predation from Tim Dilbridge from the Applied Economics Department. Applied economics in many universities used to be agricultural economics. Part of my job to keep it looking at agriculture, right? And I was very proud of that. I don't know if Tim's project will be what you guys want 100%, probably not. But I had a professor, and you'd probably have these conversations too of, my friend at the wheat commission always working on the next wheat variety. Is it important? Hugely. Is it the only game in town? No, the export deal, look at what's happened in wheat and how well they've helped some family farms with the export components. So having an economist look at wolf predation, does it give you tools in your toolbox? Maybe OCA can use them more than the Oregon Beef Council. But in my opinion, I think we should be open to these other departments. The Animal and Rangeland Sciences Department with Carol Lorenzen is very open to the Oregon Beef Council, and they're very open to the Oregon Cattlemen's. And we've gone into meetings together like the Endowed Beef Fellowship Professorship coming up, and the Associate Director that's recently been hired, and things like that. And I think we should spend our time, our windshield time, getting to Corvallis. I mean, we can zoom in. But I like those meetings where we compared the, attributes of some of the faculty, because what does that do when the ranchers and farmers that provide these funds come to campus. That's another thing I've made sure, I know it's a long ways for some people, and we do try and do some sports marketing stuff with tailgater of the game and stuff like that. But the research part, I like it when the ranchers are in the room. And if they don't ask the questions, then that's our problem. But the researchers, the first year, did they think we were looking over their shoulder? I say the first year because I just started just organizing and asked the board, can we do a meeting on campus in Corvallis at least once a year? And now I don't think we have that acrimonious. It wasn't really acrimonious, but you get my point, is by looking together at, you need to publish, you need to get tenure, you need to be an academician, but we need these tools, and whatever you need to do on the side and our interests, let's find the Venn diagram where we're looking at what can we do together, because we've got funds, and if you want them, we need to make them work. So
Okay, thanks for that explanation. Who is the makeup of the board there? How many people sit on it, and what is the dynamic there? And then who appoints that people to that position?
I'm glad you asked that question. And I've been involved with a lot of boards, and we've got a particularly good one now. I'll mention a couple of past chairmen first, being Doug Mogg, and he's our handler member, and then John Flynn, a cow-calf producer from Lakeview. So when you get great leadership like that, and those guys know each other better than they know me, but we're all very tight. John Seymour is our current chairman. John's a young man with a graduate degree from the Animal and Rangeland Sciences Department. He's also on the Tillamook Creamery, the big cheese and dairy company board of directors, and so are his folks, I believe. Beautiful farm in Pacific City overlooking the ocean, and a long family history. So one of our two dairy representatives is the current chairman. The vice chairman right now is Bill Hoyt, whom I mentioned, who is a producer who's actually been very helpful because he's a little closer to some of the stuff that we do in the larger beef markets in Oregon. And then Secretary Treasurer from Klamath Falls area is Diana Worth. Diana was recently the president of Oregon Cattle Women and is very active. So excellent board there. Curtis Martin is a cow-calf producer. We have 8 overall. We have 1 public member, Brittany Alex Paraskevas, who's Salem Development Corporation. And I've had chefs, I've had Safeway executives, but each commodity commission must have 1 public member. And Alex is a good thinker and looks at research and funding quite well. And then our newest person is Brittany Casperson from 3 Mile Canyon Farms. That's our other dairy representative. So we have 8. They're 3-year terms. The general consensus is a couple 3 terms. There used to be term limits. It was based on what the actual Oregon legislature rules for themselves were. So I've been around long enough to see it come and go with term limits, but that is not the case right now. But generally, people serve a couple terms. The appointments are not made by the Oregon Beef Council. The appointments are in my MO, right or wrong, is to keep a degree of separation from that process. You might get a call or two, and I always encourage people to apply. Most people in my limited experience, when they get acquainted with the commodity commissions in general and the Oregon Beef Council specifically, like it, support it, get it, understand that these dollars are being optimized and they're limited. But you apply to the Oregon Department of Agriculture. We're on a fiscal year exactly like the state of Oregon. So July 1st through June 30th. So the appointments, a lot of the stuff in state government, including a lot of boards and commissions, agricultural and otherwise, are set up to start July 1st. So all our new people, Brittany, for example, from 3 Mile Canyon, just started July 1st, and she'll serve a 3-year term, and then most likely will apply again and most likely get a second term. So it's a couple of terms. The director of the Oregon Department of Agriculture, which right now is acting director Lauren Henderson, who's a great guy, but we're waiting to get that position filled from the governor's office. But in the interim, And also, I helped hire Jess Paulson. He was with the USDA Foreign Agriculture Service at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, but he's the number 2 at ODA and is helping Lauren do those right now. So in the future, it will be the permanent director who we should see soon, Todd. So that's kind of the process for it.
Okay. So ODA ultimately, and the director of ODA is the one who appoints to the board, just to be clear.
Correct. ODA makes that appointment 100%.
Yep. Okay. Um, just a basic question that most people know, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. How are the Beef Checkoff dollars collected?
Yeah. Well, we're very fortunate in Oregon and in the statute to have the collection mandated through the Oregon Department of Agriculture and the brand department. And when I started, Roger Huffman, who's been involved with a lot of your OCA folks and committees, was one of the best, not only in terms of doing the collection, but also giving us a heads up on what the cattle numbers would be. You know, budgeting is an important part of that. But to answer your question on the collections, when we get audited, especially from those federal people, and they're people we know, or I shouldn't say friends, but colleagues come from Denver, and they'll look at us, and if we're doing a good job, and then what about your collections? And do you have any receivables? And we send them down to Salem, and Roger in the past, and the brand department in general, and the Oregon Department of Ag staff post them. And it's sometimes, like I say, from Denver, some pretty top people, just not every year, but every few years, and they're properly impressed. I can say that they're properly impressed. There's a little bit of slippage of animals that go to other states. So there's a few $100s of assessments here and there that don't come to Oregon, that would go to a Colorado or a Idaho. There's a few from those states, or any cattle state where some Oregon cattle go. When we've had, anyone who doesn't want to pay the beef checkoff, and I've had very little of that, but if anyone ever called and asked what would the Oregon Beef Council do, the answer is we really don't do anything. It's in the statute, required by the brand department to look at those. And I think we've had complete compliance and really airtight there. I'd like to see I know the brand department went through some issues, and I'm looking forward to them moving forward. But in the past, looking back, they've been a huge strategic partner, because as you can imagine, so as I get to know some of these other state beef councils, I mentioned I went to Texas, the Oklahoma State Beef Council, Nebraska, they have staff people spending full-time or part-time, depends on the size, but there are beef councils around the country that spend a lot of staff time making sure the assessments are properly collected. And I have a lot of faith in ODA doing that, and the brand department in particular. And would just like to say the whole board has talked about how fortunate we are to have that set up, Todd.
Okay. Got a question for you that often needs some clarity, and hopefully you can bring some clarity to it. But if you could explain the dynamics between the Oregon Beef Council, the Cattlemen's Beef Board, and then the Federation of Beef Council, and how maybe they work together or work independently. Because you hear all three of those, and it kind of gets lumped into one. And so I don't know if you could bring some clarity to that.
Well, that's an excellent question, Todd. I'm glad you asked that. And if you got a bowl of spaghetti, we can take some noodles out and try and push them uphill, because it's one of those convoluted things of, a little bit of a spider web. And I agree with you. I think one of the things that people learn, let's say you served on the Oregon Beef Council for a year or two, or you have friends that they learn those specifics and realize that there's quite a lot of firewalls and management, and in my opinion, good management. The state beef councils that we talked about, the 43 or so qualified state beef councils, qualified just means you're doing your job with the paperwork, have different enabling statutes and quite a bit of different things there. But we've talked about our setup. We're kind of more quasi-government, but we act kind of like a company with the board of directors. I think, well, you've been in our meetings, I might pipe up and say, you have to, do these state regulations on the budget hearing or whatever, um, but the checkoff goes through the Oregon Department of Ag and to the Oregon Beef Council. Half of that first dollar goes to the Cattlemen's Beef Board. And now, as we talked about, it went from $1 to $1.50. So it's 50 cents going to the CBB, the Cattlemen's Beef Board in Denver, and $1 of the $1.50 staying in Oregon. Half of that for the 5 dimes, the Oregon 50 cents, half of that for the federal dollar. Sorry for all the in the weeds, but that's just the way it is. And we talked about how that gives us some advantages and maybe some headwinds in marketing and promotion in Oregon with the Oregon Beef Council. The Cattlemen's Beef Board is the least understood of the checkoff because, and it may be the most important. My friend happens to be the CEO, Greg Haynes. He came to Oregon and talked at the dairy convention where we had an Oregon Beef Council meeting in March. And then we went to check the snowpack, which means we skied together for a day. And Greg's a great guy. He was with the U.S. Meat Export Federation. And I think I'd like to have him come back, maybe do something with you, Todd, or because he's affable. He worked for USMEF. That's a cooperator with the checkoff, but now he didn't get the CEO job at USMEF. So, good people move up, and he applied to be the CEO of the Cattlemen's Beef Board. Pretty small job. It's only 40 million bucks a year, no big deal. But I think it's expertly run, and that's where you have, and I'll try not to get too far into the details, but some states have agreements with the U.S. Department of Agriculture before they can even say much. They don't have the oversight from government like Oregon does. So you can have more or less oversight. The CBB regulates all that. They work with Washington, D.C., and so anything that you hear about the checkoff with the federal act, 1985 Farm Bill Act came into 1986, the order which kind of implements the act, or any talk of the checkoff going forward, it would be the Cattlemen's Beef Board talking to Washington, D.C. bureaucrats in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Used to work there myself. They're okay guys. But that, for those millions and millions of dollars, do you think there's any pressure there on watching those dimes and dollars and nickels? Extreme focus on that. So Oregon has a CBB representative. Some states have more. They serve a couple-year terms, and it's become a more serious job, I think. But I think if you saw Greg, if you get a chance to go to a CBB meeting as part of, for example, the national convention, it's just a couple hours out of your time, and you'll see what they need to deal with. And then what they do with that depends on the year, but those tens of millions of dollars is choose cooperators. And I think what Todd's referring to in terms of it gets a little convoluted in people's understanding is, Beef It's What's for Dinner. Is that a great program? Great program. 88% of Americans know Beef It's What's for Dinner. How many other agricultural, even food promotional slogans and logos do you know that are better than that? Not very many. And NCBA, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, has been a huge part of that. And I've been on the export committee, but also Doug Mogg from our board is now serving on the domestic marketing committee. I think they're really sophisticated people that they hire. They pay quite a bit for them. But you look at Beef Demand and the Beef It's What's for Dinner, and there's a lot of other parts of NCBA. Back a little bit, like sorry for the getting in the weeds again, but on the policy side, NCBA can work on that, but they can't use checkoff dollars. What is policy? Ballot measures. For me, a lot of it in the export deal would be free trade agreements or tariffs, stuff like that. That's policy. Natural resource issues and things that the Oregon Beef Council doesn't really work on very much. And the money that comes from that comes from voluntary contributions from individual members of the NCBA. The Federation of State Beef Councils is the other half of NCBA, and that's kind of Beef It's What's for Dinner in the promotion stuff. Nutrition has become huge. I think there's better, grower relations and producer communications and other parts as well. And that budget, I won't go through what they are year to year, Todd, but the NCBA budget can be several times what the CBB budget is. So why CBB? That's the grease on the wheels that makes the government allowed checkoff, which everybody has to pay, funnel through to the authorization requests and the fundings for, I don't know, a dozen major cooperators and maybe a few other ones. NCBA, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, biggest one there. Am I a fan? I am. You look at the beef demand, and U.S. Meat Export Federation. Am I a fan? You look at the drive and demand for beef. If that's their charter, they're doing a good job. Some of the policy stuff is a little, we have to be careful in the Oregon Beef Council, but there's an office that I'm going to take the Oregon Food and Beverage Export Alliance with the Oregon Blueberry Commission, the Oregon Potato Commission, and others. And I hope to lead that delegation to go to the NCBA office in Washington, D.C., where you can see the U.S. Capitol, you can see the White House. And I'm told from Kent Bacchus, their amazing VP for international in Washington, D.C., that the huge Weber grill that he calls the Death Star is mostly to make burgers and steaks for staffers, not so much the congressmen and senators. But Oregon has 2 senators. OCA does a lot more of that work than we do, and we thank you. But what does it cost to have where we're allowed some of those policy things, like what are the most important agricultural market access, tariffs, and international trade barriers to not only beef? I want to support the blueberry guys on their trying to get fresh and frozen tariffs in Vietnam better. In return, we got a 20% tariff ourselves in Vietnam on beef, and USMEF just opened an office in Vietnam, and they can't work on that. USMEF can't work on that. So it's maybe TMI, Todd, on some of the details, but that's a little bit about the structure between the checkoff and CBB managing the administrative part of it, and NCBA being one of the major cooperators with a big chunk of the money from that.
Okay, well, thanks for that. No, that was all good information. So lastly, the one thing I want to touch on is we're all feeling it, but there's been a reduction in the number of cattle in the United States. We're down 5.5 million across the landscape in the United States, and certainly in Oregon, we're down in numbers a little bit. One of the things that I heard recently from CattleFax is last year, even with the reduction in numbers, we produced more beef in the United States than ever before last year. And a lot of that had to do with cows and bulls going to slaughter and herd reduction continuation. This is just Todd Nash's perspective. And so we see these cattle that end up with 4 or 5 brands by the time they go to slaughter. They're hanging up an 800 or 900 pound carcass. And all of those times that they were sold, whether they were sold as the day old calf or a 300 pounder or as that final product, those ranchers along the way, backgrounders or feedlot owners that purchased, they paid into it. That final step maybe is the place we need to be capturing those dollars. And so we're looking at, consistently now somewhere between a $2,000 and $3,000 carcass. And if we assessed, a per hundredweight on that, we could be capturing dollars back to the beef councils, and rather than doing it the way that we are, makes sense to me. But I don't anticipate you weighing in on this. It's just one of those things where we continue to be more efficient, produce more beef with less cattle, and we're kind of beating ourselves up a little bit, putting the pressure back on the cow-calf producers, the backgrounders, and all of those individuals to pay for that, when maybe we should be capturing that at the final step along the way. But at any rate, I know that the herd reduction has a giant impact on what you guys do and the budget you have to work with. Any comments on any of that? You're welcome to weigh in.
Well, thank you for that opportunity to comment on that. And it sounds like you've given it a lot of thought. And these things get immediately complicated, right? It's a spider web of trying to do the checkoff. However, from running the desk of a smaller I liked going to the Texas Beef Council in Austin, and the gentleman retired, but he used to pitch for the White Sox, super sharp guy, Richard Wamrath, and said, "Come on down sometime." I went in, and he had a staff of 27. Well, what do you want to talk about, Will? Well, exports. Here's the 3 export guys. Here's the nutrition gal. No. And I went away from that going, do we want to be like that? Well, we'll never be like that. Are those people better prepared to do beef promotion than the Oregon Beef Council? Well, 27 versus 2, yeah, probably. And making friends with those kind of guys, we agreed that we'd work on some export things together. We talked about maybe Texas A&M and Oregon State could talk to each other, stuff like that. But you go away going, what's the big door prize, and then what's realistic? In my desk in a small office, I've been in small agricultural offices my whole career, and I get it, Todd. I had a guy show me his books up in Boardman where he couldn't buy a pickup because of the potato checkoff that year, stuff like that. So raising the checkoff, and does the rent go down? Does salaries go down over 5, 10, a longer time horizon? No, they go up. However, I think the Oregon Beef Council right now, there's talk of how to capture, and there's talk of raising the checkoff and things like that. But I think our feeling is let's live within our means. We can do that. We optimize and do a A+ job with what we've got. Oh yeah. Not that you do everything right. And you're right, the genetics of beef, you know more about it than I do, but just looking from my desk and talking to ranchers about, or just the numbers, the beef that we get, especially if you look back before I came aboard, like in the 60s and 80s, in that trend of cutout per animal. And that gives us a lot of good things to say, environmental and otherwise. On the economics of the checkoff, here we are with the dollar per unit. And so you're wise to bring up those things. So I think the Oregon Beef Council answer is we're living within our means. We're reducing our staff, not a lot, but going from 1 full-time to a half-time, and we'll do fine. I'll miss Julie very much, but we've got good young people in there, and it takes them time to grow in. But you'll notice if you get good people, they like to stay in these jobs. We have to speak farmer in the Portland office. They can't, and we're very proud of. Imagine those calls every once in a while. I'm proud to live in both worlds. When I go to your country, first thing I'll say is, I'm not an expert in this or that, but I love riding around in the pickup with the windshield time. I'll go see Ron Wyden tomorrow because he wanted me at the meeting in Boardman, and I'm proud to have a foot in that door too. And I think OCA leadership does that too. So we can do a lot with not money. However, there comes a tipping point, right? And you can count on us to be as efficient as possible and always get the job done with what we have. And if there's a way to make the checkoff go forward that supports further what we're doing, like it did in 2007, 2008. Every once in a while, good business people are going to bring up that question, right? And talk about what's the best way to proceed. The best thing to do is optimize. We're not going to turn the whole world on its ear from the Oregon Beef Council with beef demand, but there's more burgers consumed per capita in Oregon than anywhere else. And burgers are kind of white hot again. And so we'll take the wins we get, right, with the dollars we have. Maybe part of the answer to your question. So.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, and we'll wrap this up. But certainly we'll miss Julie. You've mentioned her a number of times, and she has been synonymous with Oregon Beef Council as long as I can remember, and always a cheerful face and an inviting presence there on her part. So. Will, I want to give you opportunity to any closing thoughts here.
Todd, it's a pleasure to work with you. I'm very proud of our leadership, and I'm proud of the money that we help OCA with. But beyond that, we get some OCA people come in, and we have a division of labor, but I think you've worked hard to bring the organizations closer together, and I really appreciate that. I don't think you've missed a meeting in a long time, and it really just helps to know that we can call each other. And we do a lot. Our desks or our day-to-day business is quite a bit different, but we also try and help each other. And there were a couple of things that came during the legislative session. I must be a weird guy when I like to get up in the morning and write some export statistics that are needed within the hour or something like that. So call us, we'll call you. And not only that, but with, Doug and John and the other people you hang out with, and keep it going. It's very, very helpful. Much appreciated.
Yeah. Thank you very much for getting on here and for all the work you do for what is beef in Oregon and beyond our borders. So enjoyed visiting with you today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Todd. Happy to be with you.
Yeah. Have a good day. Bye.